Welcome to the 217th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Glen Erik Hamilton, crime writer and author of Hard Cold Winter and other novels. Stay tuned for the interview. Well, welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Glen Erik Hamilton, author of the new crime novel, Hard Cold Winter. Glen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Jeff. Great to be here.
Sure. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about Hard Cold Winter yet, how would you describe your new novel?
Well, Hard Cold Winter is the second in a series featuring Van Shaw. And Van is a man of some extremes. The first novel was Past Crimes, which came out in early 2015. Van is a man who was raised by his grandfather, who was a career criminal, who raised Van in that life to be a professional thief. The two of them had a rather violent parting of the ways when Van was just out of high school, and Van, not having any other recourse, went into the military. And he's been finding a new life there and serving with distinction in Iraq and Afghanistan for the better part of 10 years at the beginning of Past Crimes. And he, when he is asked to return to his hometown of Seattle by his grandfather after no word between the two men for that decade. The events that unfold from that occupy much of Past Crimes, including flashbacks to Van at various ages as he's being raised in the criminal life by his grandfather, Dono. At the start of Hard Cold Winter, Van has recently mustered out of the military and is attempting to re-engage with a civilian life in Seattle, having spent his entire adult life, as I said, in the Army Rangers and having the common problems of transition that a lot of military veterans do when re-engaging with civilian life.
Great. Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus for your character, Van Shaw?
Yeah, it came from a crossing of two separate ideas. One was I had been born and raised in Seattle and lived my entire life there until about 9 or 10 years ago when my family and I moved to California. And I would frequently come back to Seattle for visits and still do. And every time I returned to the city, it seemed to have changed a little bit more. It was as if some sort of accelerator had been pushed in the progress of the city. It was experiencing a second tech boom. A lot of the downtown and the Lake Union areas were changing radically through new development and even with the real estate bust, there was still a lot going on with the city in terms of its development, and the economics of the city were changing radically. And I found that quite fascinating, being someone who had grown up in this what I perceived being a local as a fairly sleepy big city town in terms of its change, was suddenly undergoing this new renaissance for good and for ill, I think. So part of it was the fascination of that, and part of it was also I had become serious about writing shortly after moving to California, and having grown up reading crime thrillers and mystery thrillers and action adventure, was interested in writing something in that vein. And I started to think about, well, what would it be like to be raised with that moral compass, to grow up in the life and with a different idea of right and wrong versus legal and illegal. And so that started forming the genesis of who Van was as a character. And the two intersected, and that sort of became the genesis of Past Crimes, which once I started it and got serious about understanding what the story was, probably took me the better part of 3.5 years to write.
Gotcha. You mentioned in what you were saying, you mentioned you got serious about writing when you moved to California. What has your fiction writing journey been? Had you written fiction or short stories or attempted novels prior to writing Past Crimes?
No, not really. Past Crimes is my first novel. And I say that with the understanding that there was a lot of learning to write before that. I knew that I was writing a novel. I just didn't know which novel I was writing. And so there are a number of abandoned subplots or ideas that could have potentially been part of Past Crimes that didn't end up being there because of that. And, I liken it to grad school 10 pages at a time. If you're producing 10 pages a week for a writing group or for a class, It was just learning in increments as I went. But prior to taking some classes and taking some workshops and being part of a writing group, I really hadn't had any formal training in fiction writing other than what you would normally get in junior high and high school. But I always enjoyed writing, and I always had it in the back of my head that I would perhaps do it seriously someday. When we moved to California, I was able to take a few months off before I needed to look for work. And I went to the library every day and sat in one of the library carrels and wrote longhand just to see if I enjoyed the nuts and bolts of putting sentences together and putting dialogue together. And it turns out I did. So began taking some courses primarily through UCLA Extension, just to get some exposure, realized the benefit of having the sounding board of other writers and a writing group, and sort of became serious about it that way. And with a couple of year-long pauses here and there, where life intruded, I really got into it, in the latter part of the aughts, 2008, 2009, and then started writing the book that would be Past Crimes.
Sure. Were you always interested during this time in writing crime fiction? What appeals to you about crime novels?
I think the fact that the unstructured nature of them has always appealed to me. As I said, I grew up reading a lot of mystery thrillers and detective stories and crime thrillers, and one of the things that always appealed to me about the PI genre, as well as crime thrillers in general, or mysteries with criminals as protagonists, is that they're wanting to pursue an ideal of justice, whatever they perceive that to be. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they can or should work within the bounds of the law. Although I enjoy reading police procedurals as well, and I find those fascinating, particularly when they're written by people who really know what they're talking about, former law enforcement and the like. They are often hampered, might be too hard of a word, but they're restricted by the rules. It's always more interesting to me when people have their own rules, or when they're working in a society or within a group that has created its own rules. And I wanted to create a world where right and wrong, legal and illegal, as I said, are different things and are perceived as being different things by that group that you're working within. Sure.
Well, I know that Hard Cold Winter has just been published. Have you started working on another Van Shaw novel at this point?
I have. I'm happy to say that there's a 2-book deal that I just put ink to paper on. I'm working on the 3rd in the Van Shaw series now. The first 2 have been very well received. Past Crimes has been nominated for an Edgar for Best First Novel. So the reception for the series has been very strong. So there's interest in seeing a 3rd one, which I'll deliver to the publisher later this year, and it will likely be targeted for mid-2017. As for the 4th book, as part of that deal, that may be another Van Shaw book, or it may be a standalone. I have some ideas knocking around for that as well. And I'd be intrigued by either starting a new character, a new series, or simply writing a standalone novel and seeing where it leads.
Sure. So what's your daily writing process like? Do you have any specific writing rituals or routines?
I am, with only 2 books behind me, I think I'm still trying to figure out exactly what my process is. The 2nd book was the first one that I wrote on deadline. And so there were roughly 2 periods with that. The first one delivering to the publisher, and the second one delivering with the rewrites, where it was just, every night, every weekend, very focused for a couple of months to make sure that what I was delivering was as good as it could be. I'm trying to spread that out a little bit more with book 3, so it's not quite so intense during those periods, as best I can. There are a couple of nights and 1 weekend day, or for every week, that I dedicate specifically to producing pages, but I am looking to pick up the pace in that. I am trying to learn to write in the mornings before work. That is a struggle for me. So I am mostly a nighttime writer. I am seeing if I can retrain myself to get I'm normally an early riser anyway, to see if I can get up extra early and at least produce a couple of pages or some concepts prior to the start of the normal working day.
Sure. So, given your success to date with your first two novels, what writing advice would you have for aspiring writers who might be listening?
Well, I'll get the obvious ones passed first. Obviously, reading is critical. Reading as much as you can, as wide as you can. Read everything that comes to you, especially I would say if it's out of your genre, because you may find things that speak to your own voice or that inspire your own voice through genres that aren't necessarily the one that you're writing. And the second bit of obvious advice is persistence. You will encounter bad pages. You will encounter rejection. You will encounter people who just don't get whatever it is you're writing, and you have to keep going along the way. And I think if writers have persistence and they're always open to learning and growing, if their first reaction is to any criticism is thinking seriously about it, evaluating whether there's a nugget of gold to be taken away from that, I think they'll always be improving, and that they will improve through practice, because it is very much a craft that takes a lot of thought and work and openness in order to get better at. It doesn't mean that every bit of advice you receive is good, but a lot of it is worth listening to at the very least, especially if you're hearing it from multiple sources. Beyond those two obvious points, the other advice I would offer is make sure that if you're able to establish a reading group, either online or in person along the way, it's important to make sure that the people in that reading group are just as dedicated as you are. In other words, that they're approaching it professionally, that it's not just a coffee klatch, although it can be that too, that it's not just a gathering of friends, but that everyone is just as serious about your writing career and their own writing career as you're looking to approach it. Because if you're looking with an eye towards publication, you want a group that is both supportive and over time learns your foibles, learns your weak spots, and says, hey, this is happening again, or I think this scene, however delightful, has not told me anything new about these characters or about the mystery or about the investigation. And it's important that every scene do that. And so having a writing group that can spot those things is I feel, was very important in my own growth and continues to be important to my own growth. And I think it's important for every writer to have that support structure.
And how did you find the writing group that you're a member of?
I found I had a couple. One I formed with friends through, or people that I met rather, who became friends through one of the courses that I had taken through UCLA Extension. The other one, and that survived as writing groups do for a limited time. It was in progress for about 3 years and very useful for all of us. The other one, which I'm still a part of, formed out of a mystery writing workshop through the Writers Studio at UCLA. And that is more of less a group than a master class, which is taught by the instructor. It is a class that we pay to attend, and it's extremely helpful, not only because of its structure, but also because of the serious nature of it. We all know each other quite well and produce these pages each week. Having that weekly deadline is extremely important as well. Sure.
So are there books and authors that you've read in the last year or two that impressed you and that you would recommend?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I'm in the progress now of reading a number of books, both for panels that I'm part of as part of the launch of Hard Cold Winter, as well as for the Edgars. I wanted to read the other Edgar nominees as well. And I'll mention a couple of folks that I've read recently outside of those groups. One is the North Carolina mystery author Jamie Mason, who's written Three Graves Full and Monday's Lie, who has a new twist, I think, on what we would normally call the domestic thriller. And her writing is very lyrical. Her imagery is wonderful. I've really enjoyed her writing. Jamie and I know each other through conventions as well, which is how I came to read her book. The one series that I've been reading that I've really enjoyed is James Ziskin's Ellie Stone Mysteries, which could be called Mad Men with Murders, essentially, although I think he started it prior to Mad Men. They are set in around 1960 with a young female journalist named Ellie Stone in New York. And those are very evocative and a lovely time capsule of those sorts of encapsulated series mysteries that you get, especially with the period. So those are two folks that I know personally and who I've been reading. And as far as the panels, I've read Robert Rothstein's The Bomb Maker's Son, which is the third in his Parker Stern series. I just read, and I enjoyed that immensely as well. There's also a YA novel by Henry Turner called Ask the Dark, which has, I think, also been nominated for an Edgar this year, which is excellent. It's a first in, I think, what he's going to write as a series, and it's very impressive. And then I just read one which kind of gets out of the boundaries of mystery thrillers by Gwendolyn Womack. That's called The Memory Painter, and it's very definitely a thriller, but it's not your average mystery. It involves past lives and a lot of extrapolation on what reincarnation means. And that was a fascinating read. I enjoyed that one a lot.
Great. Those are lots of great recommendations. So if someone's listening and is interested in finding out more about you and about your books, where can people find you online?
Sure. It's pretty easy to track me down. Like all authors, I do have a website. It's my full name, GlenErikHamilton.com. And I try to keep that up to date with all of the events and the things that I'm doing. I have a lot of launch events happening for Hard Cold Winter, both in the Southern California area and in the Seattle area during March and April of 2016. And then I'm also on Facebook, is probably the one I use most often for posting just mostly silly updates on the conventions that I go to and the foibles I get into participating in some of these wilder panels. We enjoy having a good time at the mystery conventions, and usually that produces at least one or two silly pictures each time we go.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Glen Erik Hamilton, author of the new novel Hard Cold Winter. The book is available in bookstores now, so go buy a copy. And Glen, thanks for doing this interview.
Thanks very much, Jeff. I enjoyed being here.
Hear that? Is that America cheering or a sausage patty sizzling to perfection? It's time to cheer for Egg McMuffin and fresh cracked eggs at McDonald's. It's time to wake up to the aroma of freshly baked biscuits and treat yourself to a real honest-to-goodness morning meal. Breakfast, it's on at McDonald's. Now enjoy a large iced coffee for just $2. Add a breakfast sandwich to make a meal. Prices and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.
Hello, this is Discover, and we take customer service very seriously. We know that if you have a question or concern about your credit card, that's a serious matter, and you need to talk to a real person about it. So we offer around-the-clock access to seriously talented representatives in the USA. Again, it's a serious endeavor. The only funny thing about it is Bob. If you call us and Bob answers, you're in for a treat. Get 100% US-based customer service and talk to a real person day or night. Discover. Exceptionally common sense.